Welcome to Spiritual Naturalism Today, a conversation on science, nature, and spirituality. Our program is sponsored by the Spiritual Naturalist Society with host Daniel Strain.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. If someone were to walk into your home, would there be any indication of your practice? Would there be any indication of the fact that you have a spiritual practice? Today's topic is sacred spaces in the home. And I am joined by co-hosts Lee Anderson.
Hello.
And B.T. Newberg.
Hello.
And I'm Daniel Strain. So what about that? If someone were to come into your home, would they see any indication of your practice, whatever tradition it may be? In my case, I would have to say yes and no. They'd have to look around a little bit. There might be some little indications here and there, mostly books of the type of subject matter that I enjoy.
One title. Give us one title.
Okay. Well, I have a shelf right next to my door that has all of my special books, and these are books that have had a big impact on my way of thinking. So one of them would be What the Buddha Believed. Another one is Stoicism. That's just the title of it, Stoicism, by Sellers. And so a bunch of other stuff like that. So that'd be the most obvious one. But those are just books. If they looked around a little bit more, they would find my little Harry Potter room. And that's a room that we have on... What's that?
Now it comes out.
Yeah, well, it's not actually Harry Potter subject matter, but I say that because it's a little room under the stairs, and we decided to convert that into our meditation room. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a little closet. You open it up, and you step in there, and it's got lights, and it's got a little altar, and it's got a place to sit, and it's basically in some little carpet down there and everything, and it's a nice little meditation chamber. But it is very small. But it's nice. It's really good to meditate in. But yeah, you'd have to look around a little bit. What about you guys? What about you, BT?
Yeah. Well, I probably have some more explicitly religious-looking stuff than a lot of naturalists, which I get from kind of inherited from my pagan background. You coming into the apartment, though, you wouldn't just notice it unless you poked around again, because it's like kind of on the other side of the door in a way. You have to make a kind of an intentional turn right instead of left. But then you'll find my altar to Isis, which is my patron goddess, who to me is, lives in my imagination, but represents to me symbolically the highest and noblest parts of myself. And so having that sacred space reminds me and brings to mind the noblest and best qualities of myself. So, and it's a place to meditate as well, and to sort of unload when I have emotionally distraught days, and to kind of focus myself on being who I really want to be, as opposed to who I just drift toward when I'm not trying. So that's really the biggest thing that anyone would find. Also, yes, there's a whole bunch of books underneath that.
And what about you, Lee?
I don't know if anybody came into my house if it would be obvious to them what my practice is, because I've always been kind of the 70s flower child. So there's always been kind of incense and, Tibetan bowls. I've got a mixture of pagan, Native American, Buddhist type things around. And my specific meditation / altar area is a fireplace that doesn't get used, that I have a cushion sitting in front of. And again, if you walked in there, you would probably just think, yeah, that's just part of her decor. Like that. So I don't think anything's really too obvious.
Well, it's interesting.
But it's incorporated into everything, though, pretty much.
That's interesting that you say it that way, Lee, because when you say that people wouldn't necessarily assume that it's something spiritual, it could just be part of the decor. There's a lot of pagans who intentionally make their altar displays like that. For them, it's often because maybe they live in parts of America or the world where it's not necessarily welcomed to the average neighbor to have a pagan around, and so you want people who are in the know to know, but other people not to know. Sometimes that's the case.
Yeah, and
I could see that.
Yeah.
With me, I think it's more of the fact that I don't particularly follow one specific practice. What I do is really a combination, of the different things. So I in that way, it's diluted, and I guess it makes it less obvious exactly what my spiritual practice is.
Mm-hmm. One thing I should note is that in our little thought experiment question here, it's not really important what other people think. So right. It's more just a thought experiment to say, what's in my house? When we say, if somebody walked in there, what would they see? That's really more the emphasis. But I think another thing that we ought to make clear for our naturalist friends who may be new to naturalistic spirituality is just what this whole concept is about. You hear us talking about altars and sacred spaces and
yeah, what's up with that?
Yeah, that might seem kind of strange to some of our naturalist friends. Well, first of all, I think when we say sacred, what do we mean by that? I can say what I mean by it is that the etymology of the word, it meant set apart, right? So you had something was sacred, it was set apart. And so supernaturalists might think of it in terms of supernatural set apart from the natural, but obviously that doesn't mean anything to us. So for us, set apart means there are certain things that are like, just kind of everyday, mundane sorts of things, and then there are other things that are really focused on the important aspects of life, the very deep things about love and friendship and family and ethics and even fundamental things about how the world works or the beauty of the universe, and just these really important, meaningful things to life and to our lives specifically. And so there's a reason there for us to set those apart from just your everyday run-of-the-mill kinds of things. And
also just to clarify, what we mean by set apart in this case is not that all of those values you just mentioned are not fully integrated into the rest of our lives, quite to the contrary, but rather that we have a dedicated place where we can go and be reminded of those things and to focus on them.
Right.
And that isn't just allowed to just kind of like mush into the rest of our lives and just get lost in the jumble. It's a special place.
Yeah. In fact, when we were talking about how some people integrate the stuff into their decor, I started out that way. And originally many of the things that are on my altar now used to just be on top of that bookshelf that I mentioned. And I used to say to myself, oh, yeah, that's my altar there, But it was just out there, and it just kind of looked like a bunch of stuff on a bookshelf. And so friends would come over, and they'd start tinkering. Oh, what's this stuff over here? And they start ringing the bells and stuff. And they didn't understand that it was set apart. It was sacred for me. And so I was like, I don't really want to hear that bell right now, because I'm purposely use sound as a way to trigger a certain moment, a space and a time for me. Yeah. So I don't want to hear that sound all the time in just regular non-sacred moments. Yeah. So anyway, I kind of set it apart. I put it, wherever. But that doesn't mean that we have to physically set apart. I would think all of those methods are fine. It's just I wanted to explain to our listeners what we meant by the word sacred. There's also the matter of altars. what would you guys explain if somebody said, well, why do you have an altar? What's that about?
Well,
I don't see an altar as too different than anyone who has, like, say, Christians have either a picture of Jesus or a cross in their house. It's a reminder to you of, your spiritual practice, basically.
Yeah. I like how you use the word reminder, because that is, if we can dip into the psychology of this stuff a little bit, one of the things that's been discovered about religious symbols in your environment is they've done studies where you have people go into a room and you ask them to do just whatever mundane task, but one room has like a cross on the wall and the other one doesn't, or one room, while you're in there, you hear the call of the mezzouin, which is the Muslim call to prayer, and the other one, you don't hear that. And they find that when you are reminded by these religious symbols, when you're reminded of your deepest values or of the maybe the great being in the sky that's watching over you, you're unconsciously primed to behave more pro-socially. And so there's actually some kind of like a basic human psychology behind it. So when you go in front of your altar and you are stimulated by those particular symbols that mean something to you and are associated with your deepest values, your deepest ethics, and so on, it hits you on a more than conscious level, and it makes a difference in your life. And you can imagine, surrounding yourself with all these. Now, one could say, anybody who's studied another foreign language and tried to learn the words by putting Post-it notes all around your bathroom or whatever, thinking that you're just going to absorb them eventually, you don't, right? So I don't know if you have these, if you have your cross or your Buddha or whatever image around you all the time, if it's going to keep giving you that ethical bump all the time. We don't actually know that yet scientifically. Those studies haven't been done. But the point is that one of the functions of having this sacred space that's set apart that has these symbols is you go there, you're stimulated in a similar way that to Daniel was saying about hearing that bell that puts them into a certain mind state. There's a psychological basis to that. So there is a solid reason why that we would do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like on my altar, for example, I've got a little bust of Socrates, and I've got a little statue of Buddha, and I've got let's see what else. I've got a candle, and for me, the candle represents flame or fire, and in Stoicism they have this thing called the divine fire, which is about the kind of the activity of the cosmos, the interactivity of the constant creation, destruction cycle kind of thing of the universe, and that kind of reminds me of impermanence and that sort of thing. So it can be very tailored to the person, because what are those things that are going to remind you of the things that you're trying to be reminded of in your practice? And also, like I said, the little singing bowl, I use that. And it's also convenient to have all your little things together there for, you sit down and do your meditation or your reading, whatever, you got your stuff there. If it's all over the place, you can't really interact with it. Like I also store my incense under there so that there's a smell component and all that sort of thing. And then there's other things too, like when you enter a sacred space, even not in my home, like for example, when we go to the temple, or there's a place called the Rothko Chapel here in Houston. And it's kind of a place where a lot of different religions kind of come and have events. It's a city-run place, and or it's for the whole city. And I consider that sacred ground. Now, it's not that I think that there's some objective thing going on there that a person could, maybe build a detector and detect where the sacred grounds are or anything like that. Yeah, it's just it's an attitude type thing that, I've decided when I step on a sacred ground, I turn my phone off. I don't want to be in a sacred space checking my email, because that will destroy the function of what I'm trying to do, which is hone my mind on something. So there's these little rules that I have for myself. I also don't chit-chat about, we got to make that appointment for the thing, and then we got to do all this stuff, and we got to go get my tires changed, and I don't have that kind of chit-chat going on in a sacred space.
Yeah, one can almost draw an analogy to when you're trying to set the mood for a romantic night. There are certain things you don't bring up,
That is a wonderful point. Mm-hmm. Because really what you're doing is you're creating a special moment. Like somebody who might like candles to take a boba bath because they had a stressful day or something, Exactly. You're creating a special moment for yourself if it's a singular, if it's a solo type ritual or activity. But, even in communal rituals, they do the same thing. So that's a wonderful analogy. Yeah, I really like that. And yet nobody would say, you're being superstitious. What do you think, the candles are going to help your relationship, help your date go well? No, it is just it sets the mood. We're human beings. We're not robots.
Right.
So if a person was going to, I imagine that this idea of sacred spaces in the home is going to vary widely depending not only on the individual, but the traditions that they're inspired by, the wisdom that they're inspired by.
Yeah, it's definitely going to vary, and I should add, just as an addendum to the psychology what I was talking about there, that those symbols I was talking about depend on what your values are. So, for example, if you're not a Christian, the cross may not create the pro-social reaction I was talking about. Mm-hmm. But if you're like an atheist, reminders of judicial authority might. Or if you're a Muslim, the call of the Mezouin might. Or Muezzin.
Yeah, like the reason I have a Socrates and a Buddha is because I practice kind of a philosophy, a mixed philosophy of Stoicism and Buddhism, and East and West, and that's what that represents to me. But when you brought the cross up, it actually reminded me that I do have I do have rosary beads on there recently because Julie and I we went to Greece, and that's where I got the little statuette of Socrates, and we visited it was in Rome. We visited the Vatican, and while we were at the Vatican, I picked up one. I'd never owned a rosary before, and
don't you wear the mullah beads around your wrist?
I do.
Mm-hmm. That's you mean you
I
never
wouldn't
had a
call that a
Catholic
rosary, but I guess
Okay.
kind of similar. I use those to help in meditation too. I use it for counting my breaths sometimes, but the Christian rosary with a cross on it and everything. Okay. I hadn't owned one before, but I went ahead and got one, and I put it on the altar because it's kind of a cycle for me. I started as a Christian and then became an atheist, and then got philosophical, became a Stoic, became a Buddhist, and only after I'd kind of made that journey did I start to really relate to the teachings of the figure of Jesus in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it felt kind of like a circle, only it was a very different reapproaching to that, naturalistic sort of interpretations. But I felt like I understood things that Jesus was saying better after going through that, like forgiving your enemies, you know, and loving your enemies. That's really hard to comprehend, but after you study Buddhism, it becomes easier to kind of get. And so I put it on there as as kind of a representative of that part of my life, of coming back to those concepts.
Cool.
Well, let me just say at the opposite end too, since we're talking about sacred space around the home, I also, one of my sacred spaces here is I have a single chair that is underneath a lone oak tree out in the middle of the field. And I purposely don't take anything out there. There's no symbols. There's nothing other than the chair. There's nothing man-made. And that's one of the better sacred spaces that I have, because I'm basically out there, number one, looking at the awe of nature, but number two, meditating with just the earth, and the environment around me like that too. So you don't have to have all kinds of different symbols around you, basically your sacred space is just what you make it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And that reminds me of when I was a boy growing up in my parents' place. So I grew. My father's a crop duster, and we actually lived right on the airport in our tiny little town. So it wasn't like a big old airport; it was a tiny town airport, right? And the whole space there, with like my dad being a pilot, like it all felt like it was all like their space. Nothing was my own. But there was a drainage ditch. If anybody's ever been in kind of a rural area, it's not a river, or it's kind of like a creek, but it's artificial, just for the water to run off from the fields. So it's not even really like wild nature in any sense, but it was just something that I could go out there and I could go down into the ditch and I wouldn't see anything else or anybody else around, and it was just me and the water and the birds, and that was like my special little place when I was a kid growing up. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like we bring the sacredness with us sometimes, and then sometimes we take it away.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And Lee, I was going to ask you if you could describe for the listeners, because you live in a very natural kind of setting, and why don't you describe for us?
Well, and I've got a combination of quite a few things, but I live in the East Texas piney woods, and so I've got these really tall pine trees that surround a lot of the land here. But I have an open field of about 18 acres, and it's a hay field, so it gets mowed maybe twice in the summer or so. So it doesn't get grown over. But I have, there's I think 6 individual either oak or pine trees that are kind of in the middle of the field. So it's the very picturesque lone tree in the middle of a field, like that for that area. And then the other area, we have a lake and creeks, like you mentioned, that go through the piney woods and everything. So lots of birds, lots of animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, there always seems to be something special about water, isn't there?
Yes. Especially moving water.
Sound. Yeah. But I think we could also, for listeners who might not be nature-y types, which there are those people out there, we can also draw an analogy in this part. See, because now we're talking about parts where we don't have any obvious symbols to anyone in these places that it's sacred to us. It just is, right? We can also draw an analogy to a part of your home where when someone walks in through the door, they wouldn't have any idea that this is a sacred space for you. Kind of the flip side of our opening question. But for you, that's just where your rocking chair is, and that's where you can see the sunset from your out the window or something, or that's it's just the place where you go when there's no TV or radio and you can just be alone with your thoughts and just take a breather. There can be those.
Yeah, in a way you could say that.
Exactly.
Yeah, in a way you could say that the symbols are really the secondary kind of thing. It's like the real direct experience is where you find the sacred, and the symbols are just kind of like a wrapper vehicle that you can kind of use to, as a quickie sort of reminder. But to me, a direct experience of something that feels sacred to you directly without the need of symbols or language, that's what the symbols are trying to get at, is that direct experience. So absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, even little things like how the light comes in through a certain window or something like that at a certain time of day. And you might even find that certain spaces become sacred after the fact and you never realized it.
Oh, I think those are the best ones.
Mm. They just sort of spontaneously arise. And
yeah, they just kind of, you grow into it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. But, and it's kind of like ritual, too. Understanding the sacred space concept is kind of like understanding ritual, because it's all about where you are mentally when you're in that space or when you approach that space, and what kind of experience you're having in that space. I mean, it would be very possible to, desacralize for the moment any space by just not recognizing it, or not, it's kind of like when it comes to ritual, there's a lot of times where a person could be, everybody's doing a ritual and the person's just sitting there watching, and they're not in that frame of mind that everybody else is in, and for them it's just kind of this meaningless series of actions. And you could say the same thing about a sacred space in your home. So you're really making that there for you. So it makes sense to allow yourself to have that sacred space and sacred time, setting apart times for this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like you said, it's mainly about your mindset, and I like what you said about, things that you didn't set up to be sacred spaces, but they suddenly become sacred spaces, because those are the types of things also that, in a busy world, you go on travel, you go other places, but you can take the memory of those places, with you too, and, just the memories help make a new place sacred.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
That's why I think I've never really felt a connection to the cemeteries or grave sites of loved ones. I never felt like that's where I needed to go to think about them, because they never were there except the very end. It's
right.
It's the places that they occupied, or that we occupied together, or that I occupy that reminds me of some aspect of them. Mm-hmm. Was always more fitting to me than the grave site as a place to reflect on that person.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's how you think of them and how you remember them. Because, I like cemeteries and going there to think about specific people, but that's because I've built that up through going there. You kind of train your mind into remembering the things when you get certain stimuli, and that's what a gravestone kind of is. Also, we're kind of just built to think concretely more than abstractly, and when you have something physical that you can associate with a person, then that's better than just a memory in terms of like basic human psychology. But it really it matters. It's so much more important how you personally, where your emotion is invested in that person, whether it's with a particular memory or something.
Yeah, there's no one right way to do this practice, because there's no one way that all human beings are. Well, I think we're near the end of our time, and I really enjoy hearing your guys' perspective on this. One thing that we could always do is discuss more about sharing ideas about how to set up places like that, or how practices might integrate with places like that.
I can just offer one quick tidbit on that. One thing that I liked doing when I was in Japan, I don't do it very much anymore for some reason, but I liked bringing in something from outside that reflects the season. So if it was
That's
autumn,
cool.
for example, I might bring in kind of like the kind of golden grass, like long grass, kind of like what Lee would have outside when before it's mowed.
Yeah, that's a neat idea.
Of course, you have to be careful with that, not bringing in bugs and stuff.
Or snakes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, cool. We're near the end of our time, and thank you for listening to us. And please check out our other episodes. I want to just put out a reminder that our October course, beginning of October, is our course in Introduction to Spiritual Naturalism.
And we do have some stuff in there on sacred spaces and reminding yourself of your deepest values through these particular techniques like this. We do have that in there.
That's true. Good point. Yeah. Okay. Well, so thank you for joining us, and please check us out next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
This program was sponsored by the Spiritual Naturalist Society. Learn more and become a member at spiritualnaturalistsociety.org. Our music was composed by John Clemisrude. Jay Forrest is our technical director. Please share our program and join us next time on Spiritual Naturalism Today.